Risk analysis is what I do for a living. I'm an investment advisor, so I'm always managing people's risk. And so when I look at the risk return, and I figure I'm just not going to ride outdoors. It's in the same vein, when I look at my cardiac health, whatever it may be, I need to manage it in the same way. And unnecessary risks just don't make a lot of sense to me in that respect. And I'm sure I can find something else that would provide me the same sort of satisfaction over time and the same health and well-being benefits.
Hello, and welcome once again to the TriDoc podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Sankoff, the TriDoc, an emergency physician, a triathlete, a multiple Ironman finisher, coming to you, as always, from beautiful, sunny Denver, Colorado. And this is the August 21st, 2026 episode. It is my wedding anniversary, and so I want to wish my beautiful wife, Sandra, a wonderful and fantastic 27th wedding anniversary. Happy anniversary, my love. And to all of my listeners, I want to acknowledge that we have an interview again for this episode. The voice that you heard at the beginning of the episode was that of my guest on this very podcast. It is a listener. It is a friend of mine. It is somebody who has been on this podcast once before. And it is somebody who was appalled, I dare say, that I didn't have a guest on the last episode. Brian Dunn, a friend of the podcast for a very long time, stepped up to the plate and shared with me that he felt like he had a story that listeners would like to hear, and I fully concur. And so Brian came on and is here to tell his story of how he has dealt with some cardiac issues over the last several years, and how he approaches training and racing with the understanding that as he gets older, this is something that he has to face, and something that many of us, as growing older as we do in endurance sport, something that we hear all the time with cardiac issues causing problems in the swim, for example. Brian is very aware of this as a possibility. He actually went to try and be preventative in getting things assessed and ended up having issues on the very day that he was supposed to get things checked out. So have a listen to Brian's story. I think you'll find it quite informational and entertaining. And Brian's just always a great guy to chat with. And he did a great job on this, telling his story, and I think that you will enjoy it, and that's coming up later. I also want to acknowledge all of the people who reached out by email, through the Facebook page, and through Messenger, and all the different ways you can contact me, who came up with their own suggestions for interviewees. And I have followed up on all of the recommendations that were made to me, and I have several interviews coming up on the next few episodes because of you, my listeners. So I am, as always, incredibly grateful, always so happy to see how engaged my listeners are, and I will let you know if the well is running dry on interviews in the future. I definitely will come back to you, because you guys were so good and helpful in coming up with just terrific suggestions for some really interesting interviews that are going to be coming up on the episodes that follow this one. Before we get to Brian's interview, we will have a medical mailbag on a supplement, a product called CoreCtrl. It is a product that Alistair Brownlee is affiliated with as a spokesperson, and I think he actually has an ownership stake in the company that makes it. And it's a supplement that promises to help you manage your thermodynamics as you go to race in warm environments. This is a product that I dare say is one of the few that we have reviewed on this program that actually has some science to back up its claims. So I'm very excited to actually have that conversation with Coach Juliet Hockman coming up in just a short bit, in which we will review that evidence and discuss with you the claims that CoreCtrl makes. We'll talk about the caveats. It's not exactly all it's cracked up to be, but for some people, this may actually be a supplement of interest, something you may want to consider. So have a listen. That medical mailbag is coming up very shortly. Before we get to that, I want to acknowledge that we are a couple of weeks away now from the World Championships in Nice, the 70.3 Worlds, and that is an event that I will be participating in. I've heard from several other listeners who are going to be there. I would love to have the opportunity to say hello, so please let me know if your plans are going to be attending in Nice, and let's make sure that we get together, and at the very least, we'll have a brief bonjour. Peut-être we can share a cappuccino and a story over a croissant or something like that. But definitely we want to be sure to try and get the listeners together and maybe get a photo, do the typical Instagram thing. I also want to acknowledge what happened last weekend in Sweden, where Matthew Marquardt set all-time North American record for Ironman distance events with a really fast 7:28 for the Ironman, placing second on the day. The guy just continues to just amaze. I'm always a big fan of Matthew because of what he's able to accomplish as a medical student, a research student, and able to just perform at the highest level as a professional. This was a very stacked field, and he came just out of the water, charged to the front on the bike, and got off the bike with a very accomplished runner and was able to hang on for second, finished about a minute and a half back, I believe, and just had a great overall day. I'm also very proud to say that Matthew rides with the initials of many cancer patients and people who have passed away from cancer on the bicycle frame of his Trek, and my very own daughter, Lauren, her initials are on the front fork of his bike, added last year after I spoke with him on this podcast. So Matthew continuing to just do what he does best, heading into the last 6 weeks or so as he is preparing for his big day in Kona. It'll be very exciting to see what he's able to do. I look forward to cheering him on. We did have some very sad news that occurred this past week. We had a very just terrible collision between a car and a bicycle team, a college bicycle team in, I believe it was Tennessee, where 2 young students lost their lives and several other are in critical condition. The details of the collision are not completely clear to me. There were very little details provided in the news, but it's yet another reminder of how fragile, how quick things can change, and how we have to never take things for granted, live every day to the absolute maximum. And it is unfortunately yet another reminder of how cars and bikes continue to share the same space, and in ways that unfortunately come to these kinds of endings. And it's just a horrible situation. I feel just an immense sense of loss, and I can't even begin to imagine what the family and friends are going through of that small community, and my heart goes out to them. I don't want to dwell too much on such tragic stories. I want to instead focus on the positive things that we as multi-sport athletes are able to do on a day-to-day basis. And so please keep your friends and family close, and remember when you're training that we do so for a love of life and a zest for youthfulness. So keep the positive thoughts going, and remember your finish line is out there somewhere. So do whatever you can to stay safe while you are training. With that said, let's move to the medical mailbag question. CoreCtrl. It's a fancy new supplement. It's not really getting a ton of advertising or press. The company reached out to me not that long ago to ask about guesting on the podcast, as I don't do endorsements or product endorsements on the show. So instead, I decided to look into it from a scientific perspective myself. And what did I find? We'll have that assessment for you, and that's coming up right after this short break. All right, we have an atmospheric medical mailbag for you this week. I'm recording this while in Hilton Head, South Carolina, where it is ungodly humidity and just exceedingly warm. But that means afternoon thunder showers. And so we have an ongoing thunder shower right now. All of our conversation today will be punctuated with the thunderclaps, and who knows, maybe some lightning in the background. We'll see. But all of that to say, it's time for the medical mailbag. And I am joined by the dual world champion.
No, I guess yes.
Yes. The
Okay.
dual world champion, newly crowned at the USAT Nationals this past weekend in Wisconsin. Oh, I should preface. So this episode is coming out on August. I don't even remember the date it's coming out. So we're recording this on an off week. So
Yes.
Nationals just happened, and we are talking, but the episode will come out next week. Anyways, you don't
Right.
care about all this. All you care
No.
about is hearing how well Juliet did in Wisconsin. So Juliet, welcome to the podcast once again. Tell us
Thank
how
you.
amazing you did on the weekend.
This weekend in Milwaukee was the USA Triathlon National Championships, which means 3 different races: the Olympic distance, the regular or more traditional sprint distance, non-draft, and then the draft legal sprint distance, and then something called mixed team relay, where you have teams of 2 boys or two male, 2 female, and it's extremely short triathlon, and each person does a teeny triathlon and then hands off to the next person. So we had 7 live sport athletes there, which was amazing, and everybody just did such an extraordinary job. A few in particular standout performances, best they've ever finished, 10K PR off the bike. 5 people got world championship spots for next year. It's just so much fun.
That's
and
awesome.
yeah, it was really great. And I was pleased with my racing. I raced the 2 sprint races, so both the draft legal and the non-draft legal sprint races, and then this mixed team relay. And I won both sprint races, which was really exciting. It's been about 4 years since I've dipped my toe into this short course stuff. Thank you. So I never really know, boy, do I have any fast twitch fibers left. And then also on the Sunday race in the non-draft legal, I was riding my road bike with clip-on aero bars, and I wasn't sure how that was going to play either, because there is a disadvantage there with TT bikes. So
Right.
anyway, it worked out great. It's a very well-run event. All you long course people out there, if you went straight to long course when you first started triathlon and you've never done a short course event, these USAT national championships are extremely well-run. There are 4,500 athletes there.
That's
so lots
incredible.
It's a lot of athletes. Everything runs very smoothly. It's just a good group, and the people are super friendly, and it's a huge range. There's 16-year-olds up to 80-plus-year-olds. It's just really neat. It's really fun.
I'm
so
always
it's great.
surprised about where they put these events.
I
They
know.
seem to put them in weird places and places that are susceptible to, as you told me, you had this afternoon thunder shower roll in, which is common for that part of the world. So I'm always surprised where they do this. I don't know, maybe it's a bidding system, and yeah, I don't really know.
I think it is a bidding system. They obviously have to have a place that can accommodate 4,000 to 5,000 athletes plus their families.
Yeah.
They'd probably prefer to have places that are fairly centrally located. I was a bit dubious about Milwaukee, to be honest. I thought, oh, it's Milwaukee. But the course was fantastic for this type of racing. It wasn't exciting. It was pretty much on a highway, but then it did go through a park. There wasn't anything sort of bucolic or even iconic about it, but it just worked to crank through these age groups.
Yeah.
The swimming was all in a lagoon. It was very compact. So it worked to crank through that many people. And it was easy to spectate, which is nice because I did spectate the Olympic distance race. So yeah, next year it's in Iowa.
Oh gosh, we're in Iowa.
Near Des Moines, I think.
So that's fascinating. So I was in Des Moines as for AAU. And
Yes.
Des Moines it's an interesting city. It's very quiet. It's a very quiet city, but it does have a big university there, Drake University. And I was actually saying to my wife, I was like, gosh, this would be a really good place for a 70.3 or some kind of triathlon because they've got a river. They have beautiful parks and bike lanes and everything else. And it's a quiet city, lots of hotels. And they had this AAU event, which had thousands of athletes. So they clearly have the ability to do this. The only problem is the weather. The weather is just ungodly hot and humid. And so again, you're going to a place that is going to be very uncomfortable and have the threat of thunder showers all the time. The AAU events were constantly under weather advisories. Now, the one thing about the USAT events is they do take place in the mornings. Were they over pretty much by noon most days?
The first day, the draft legal sprint day, no, I didn't even start until noon. It was a
Interesting.
very
Okay.
late start. But the other 2 days, the sprint race on the last day, the last wave went off at 9:20, and I think the thunderstorm broke at about 11:45. So people were finished. They were still milling about getting their stuff out of transition, and they evacuated the race site incredibly fast because lightning was all over the place.
Yeah.
Right. Some people who were late to get their bikes had to go back and get them, but it was fine. But last year for this event, because they do it 2 years in one city, the entire sprint race day on Sunday was canceled because
Right. I remember that.
that-
Flooding.
yeah. flooding. Yeah, exactly. But it's always fun. I've lived on the coasts most of my life, and it's always fun to go to Milwaukee and get an impression on a sort of mid-sized Midwest city,
Yeah,
and
Milwaukee's a nice city.
it was really fun. It's so empty. It was incredibly empty. There's nobody there. I scootered and rode my bike straight down the middle of these streets. Lots of public art, lots of public places, parks, theaters, museums, but terrible road quality. It's just funny.
Yeah.
Anyway, I really enjoyed it. And I wish I'd been able to party a little bit more because I had brats and beer, and I wanted to have brats and beer, but I couldn't really have brats and beer.
Next
So
time.
yeah,
You're going to
really
Hamburg.
good.
You could have brats and beer
Yes, I
there.
get brats and beer in Hamburg.
Yeah,
That's right.
there you go.
That's right.
Awesome.
Yep.
That's super exciting. Congratulations again. And congratulations to all the life sport athletes and all the other athletes who may have had good days out there. We'd love to hear from you. Why don't you head on over to the to the TriDoc podcast private Facebook group. We'd love to hear your experiences. Did you participate at the short course nationals? What was your experience like? Did you have a great time out there? And just tell us your experience. We have a medical mailbag. It's not so much a question as really something that came to me as an email. And so we wanted to pursue it as something to explore. So Juliet, what are we going to be looking at on today's episode?
Yeah, this is very topical, not only for where you are right now in terms of the climate, but also as we think about just one short year from now, it will be 70.3 Worlds in Chattanooga, and everybody's talking about how hot it's going to be.
Yeah.
So neat that this came across the transom. This is a product called CoreCtrl, and it claims to help athletes better prepare for hot races. And from what I understand, from what you told me, they reached out to you and said, hey, can we come on your show and talk about this? But you're a totally impartial podcast. And so you said, no, but we will look at it. And so you and your team took a look at it. And I'm really excited to hear about what the results were. So what did you guys find out?
Yeah. So Sarah Lopez, intern extraordinaire, who looked into this, she was pretty excited because she started our discussion by saying, I was so excited because finally I found something that actually has science to back up their claims. And so right away, I was like, oh, do tell. It's so unusual that we get something on the program that we can say, you know what, they actually do have something there. And I want to I think the TLDR take home from this is that CoreCtrl does not make outsized claims on their website. What they say is backed up by science. So that's great. But there are some significant caveats as to whether or not you can really get the kind of benefits that they are suggesting are possible with their supplements. So that's sort of the short version, but let's dig into it a little bit. The main component and the main sort of thing within their supplement that they are claiming will benefit you is something that I'm sure most of you have heard of, and it is called taurine. It is a non-proteinogenic amino acid. So what I mean by that is taurine is an amino acid. It's found widely distributed in our tissues, in our bodies already, naturally occurring, but it's not taken up and not one of the building blocks of protein like so many other amino acids are. Does taurine ring a bell for you? Do you know where you can find taurine commercially?
It's the chemical in the pool that stops it from when someone pees.
That would be chlorine. That's chlorine. Taurine with a T. Taurine with a T is the component that is found in Red Bull. Yeah. So Red Bull.
I've never ever in my life had, so I have no idea.
And it's found in a lot of energy drinks, but Red Bull, I think, was the first one that really gave large quantities of taurine. So a can of Red Bull has about a gram, 1,000 milligrams of taurine. And it's not for this specific purpose. It's because they've always claimed, oh, taurine it's good for you. It gives you energy. It's an antioxidant, blah, blah, blah. And there's been an increasing sort of body of evidence and science that has looked at taurine for other reasons within the endurance community, specifically looking at how it has an impact on the ability for the body to dissipate heat. And the way that taurine seems to have this impact is on its effect on the sweat glands. So it turns out that taurine in large quantities, and I'm talking large. So I said that a can of Red Bull is 1,000 milligrams.
1 gram.
One packet of the CoreCtrl, which is it's like a powder that you mix into a water and make a drink out of. It contains 4,000 milligrams. So it's 4 times what you would
Okay.
get in one can. Now, the other stuff that Red Bull has is like caffeine and a few other components. That's not in the CoreCtrl. CoreCtrl has basically large amounts of taurine along with electrolytes. Okay. So taurine has been in these kinds of amounts, especially when taken over an extended period of time. It has to be taken for several days in a row to saturate your tissues, allows or causes sweat glands to produce more sweat per sweat gland. It actually activates sweat glands so that sweat glands that normally wouldn't produce sweat start producing sweat and will do so at lower temperatures. So basically, that's how this stuff works. The idea is that you saturate your tissues with taurine, you will start sweating earlier, you will sweat significantly more, and you'll sweat from places where you haven't sweat normally. And so basically you become a hot, sweaty mess. But the idea is that you are enhancing your ability to cool through evaporative cooling. So just a reminder, the whole reason sweat works is because sweat comes onto your skin. You shift your blood from your core to your skin. When you're very hot, you become flushed. The reason for that is because all the capillaries in your skin are dilating. Blood is going to your skin to basically shed heat to the atmosphere. And that ability to shed heat is enhanced by the evaporation of sweat that is on the skin. So already you can probably anticipate one of the limitations of this. Can you think of
Oh, I
it?
can think that I'm stuck about 2 minutes ago on as a menopausal woman who I don't want to sweat any more than I already do. I don't want to be a hot, sweaty mess. Thank you very much. I'm
But
stuck
this
back
is,
there.
but when we talk about heat acclimation, we talk about like sauna work or any of those things.
Yes.
That's
Mhm.
what you're doing.
Mhm.
You're teaching your body to sweat earlier. You're teaching your body to sweat more. CoreCtrl is basically doing this without doing the sauna. So it's the same thing. So that is a good thing. Okay. The
Okay.
problem is, and this is the problem is that evaporative cooling only works when you have efficient evaporation. So here I am in Hilton Head. I went for a run this morning, got up at 6 a.m. It's already 88 degrees and 100% humidity. Sweat doesn't evaporate in that situation. It's too humid. The air is so filled with moisture that sweat is not coming off your body. It's just sitting there. So your clothes become wet, you become wet. But because the sweat doesn't evaporate, you could sweat all you want. If you enhance your sweating, it's great. But because the sweat is not evaporating, it's not contributing to cooling you. So if you go to Hawaii, if you go to Florida, if you go to Chattanooga, all these places that are very humid, if you get your body to sweat more, you are doing nothing to actually cool yourself more efficiently. Now, the heat acclimation protocols, the sauna, the things like that, they work in different ways. They actually work to make your body more adaptive to the heat. They increase your total body extracellular fluid. They increase your set point for temperature, so you actually become more comfortable at a higher set point. So the sauna protocols actually do more than does this product. This product's claim to fame, and the thing that this product says that it can do, is just make you sweat more. That's it. It doesn't change any of those other things that the sauna does. But the question now is, okay, what does the science say? Does the science back up their claims? And you know what? It does. We were stunned to find out that the science is solid, and it really does. So let's look at some of the studies. 2024 European Journal of Applied Physiology, Peel and other authors, looking at, and this is citation straight off the website. Basically, they're using this citation for their marketing. It's a randomized controlled trial, double-blind, placebo-controlled crossover, so that patients work as their own control. And a very small study, 12 men, 3 women. They had an 8-day loading period of 4,000 grams per day. Sorry, 4,000 milligrams. 4,000 grams would be a lot. 4,000 milligrams per day. And they did this for 8 days. And then they had a treadmill walking at fixed heat production, followed by treadmill walking in a ramped humidity. So this is a low effort exercise, not really comparable to what we do in a triathlon, but still what they were looking for was they were assessing for whole body sweat loss, local sweat rates, sweat gland activation, core temperature, things like that. What they found, whole body sweat loss increased by 27%.
Wow.
So really impressive. Heat conservation, evaporative heat loss was improved by 27%, and heat
Wow.
storage within the tissues decreased by 72%. But because these people were not exercising at a very high rate, their core temperature didn't really change. They didn't really raise their core temperature, so it's not surprising that we didn't see anything here. So improved thermoregulation is not really claimed by this study, but the ability to improve sweating is dramatic. Very dramatic, and definitely something here. Next study, 2019 European Journal of Sports Science, page Waldron, excuse me. This is a dose sort of precursor study where they were trying to test about what kind of dose you needed. And they were able to show that using the same kind of loading of 4 grams per day over 8 days, had people cycling at their ventilatory threshold and doing a time to exhaustion test, they were actually, again, able to show that sweat rates improved by 13%. They showed that core temperature was improved in this case by not a lot, but about half a degree, which is 38.1 versus 38.5. It's not nothing.
Yep.
And then time to exhaustion, 10%. So improved by 10%. That's again, that's a number that's statistical, but also I think clinically important as well. So all of these are, I think, really big things. 2021 Journal of International Society of Sports Nutrition, a systematic review of 19 studies, just looking at taurine and its ability to do things like this. They found at this time, and this is back in 2021, so before some of these other studies we've talked about, it's kind of a broad review, and it just said taurine looks like it's good. It looks like it improves sweating, but we need more studies. But again, I think we've had more studies since then. 2026, a study showing that taurine was a little more limited in its effect, but they weren't looking specifically at sweating. They were looking at power production. They were looking at actual performance, and they found that there was no significant effect of adding taurine to strength, power, or anaerobic capacity, suggesting that while sweating is improved, it doesn't actually have a direct impact on endurance performance. And I think that's important. And I want to be very fair to CoreCtrl. At no point do they say on their website that taking this product is going to improve your ability to perform. What they say is maximize your fitness, the fitness that you have built by sweating more and cooling yourself more efficiently. And I give them full props for that. You know, like so often we see these supplement makers say, oh, just take our product and you're going to be so much better. That is not what they're saying. They're saying you have done the hard work. You've got the fitness. Why not maximize your ability to use that fitness in hot environments by improving your sweating by using this product, which I think is brilliant. Good for them.
Okay.
Now we're going to get into some of the caveats because there are some caveats and there's important ones. 2025 European Journal of Sports Science, caffeine and taurine co-ingestion. And this is a big one, folks.
Okay.
If you take caffeine and taurine together, the caffeine negates the effects of the taurine.
Oh, okay.
And wipes out the benefits of the sweating. Now, did you drink any coffee before your races?
Yeah, that's the thing. You haven't disclosed yet how this product gets used. Let's say an athlete is preparing for a very hot race. Do they use it for 1 week straight, 2 weeks out, like a heat protocol?
8 days leading up to the race.
Leading up to, so even right up to the day before the race. So basically, okay, yeah.
And we know the benefits of caffeine, right? We talked about. Now, I do want to point out that in this particular study, 2025 study, the caffeine dose was large, like really large, like 300 milligrams to 350 milligrams. So that's a lot more than a cup of coffee.
Yeah,
right?
It's 3.5. Yeah.
That's a lot more than a cup of coffee. But so we don't know if just a cup of coffee is going to negate the effects of taurine. But even if it negates the effects, it is important. So if it tempers the effects, right? Because I don't know too many people that are going to want to take away the caffeine effect in the hopes that the taurine effect is somehow going to make up for it, because we see that taurine doesn't improve performance. It just improves your sweating. That 10% bonus I saw on the to exhaustion that we saw in the cycling seems to me to be not a result from the taurine improving performance, but just because they were able to keep their core temperature down and therefore able to cycle longer. So
okay.
Safety data, a couple of different studies looked at safety data and found that this was safe. It's not banned by WADA at this point. And yeah, just it's really nice to find a product that doesn't oversell itself, that has science to back up its claims, and that seems to be beneficial in the ways that it says it is. Now, I do want to get to the negatives. So not negatives, but just the caveats. Look, does this stuff work? I think it definitely does what it says it does, which is that by taking 8 days, and by the way, it's $35 for an 8-day supply, it is packed with all kinds of electrolytes, which is not useful, because what they're saying is if you take this stuff, you're going to be sweating a lot. Therefore, you're going to sweat out. You're going to need more salt. You're going to need more magnesium, because if you don't have salt and magnesium, you're not going to sweat, because your sweat glands will not produce sweat unless you have the electrolytes and the fluid to manage that sweat, which means if you're sweating 27% more, just think about how much more salt and how much more fluid you need to take during your race.
Right.
So that's a big bump. Now, you can't load salt and fluid before a race. All of the salt you take that's in excess, you're just going to pee it out. So putting all these electrolytes in these packets for 8 days, that's a waste. And that's a waste of money. You're just peeing it out anyways.
Okay.
But $35 for 8 days of this stuff, if you wanted to take the taurine in the form of a Red Bull would actually end up costing you $10 a day to get the same amount of taurine. So it would be more. So this is actually a more cost-effective way of getting the taurine. The electrolytes, like I said, kind of useless. But the negatives are, okay, it's going to make you sweat more, but are you going to a place where that sweat is going to lead to evaporative cooling? If you're racing in Boulder, absolutely. Sweating more is probably helpful. But you're losing a ton of fluid when you race at high altitude, right? We know that already. You're breathing out liquid at a higher rate. You're losing it from just evaporative cooling because it's so dry. And now if you're going to increase your sweating by 25%, the amount of fluid you have to take in to make sure you don't get dehydrated and are able to perform just went up by 25%. That's a big increase. And just think how hard it is to drink that much fluid already. And now you got to increase it by 25%. That's a lot.
Yeah.
Salt as well. Okay. We've talked in the past about how we don't want to take too much salt. If you're going to do this, you got to take a lot more salt, more salt, because in order to keep yourself sweating, in order to keep yourself in balance, you do have to take a lot more salt. And then the other negative is clothing. If you're not wearing clothing that's going to allow that sweat to evaporate, then you've lost. It's not benefiting you at all. And we already know that there are a lot of fabrics that will soak up your sweat, but won't let it evaporate, in which case it's not particularly helpful. And then the final negative is the caffeine effect, which taken in sum, these are important considerations. To me, the big one is the amount of fluid you have to take to allow for this to work. And that to me is a killer, because I know how much I drink in a race in Boulder. And for me to ramp that up by another 25% would be really hard.
I wonder if we're narrowing the scope of races for which this might be beneficial. Something like a St. George, which isn't as high. I don't hold it in there anymore, of course.
But Oregon wasn't that humid. I think Oregon would be a good example where this would work.
It's not that hot there. And or Northern California, the new one in Northern California, that's going to be dry, right? Yeah. So anything that's in more of a high desert or desert climate is going to be, but you've still got the negative, you've still got the problem of the caffeine.
And you've got the problem of just being able to get enough fluid in to make up for these losses. It's a big deal. Now, I don't have any experience with the product. I can't say for sure like how much of a deal it is, but when you're showing me papers that show 26% increase in sweating, and we know, I hear from people all the time, oh, I sweat so much. Just imagine increasing the amount of sweat by 26%. That's a lot. That's a lot of fluid. That's a lot of salt. And keeping on top of that, you just have to think, is this going to come out in the wash? No pun intended. But I want to be very clear, and this is really important. This is a supplement, CoreCtrl by True Fuels, that does exactly what it advertises itself to do. It has science to back up all of their claims. I give them 100% props for not overselling their claims. I think that this is the gold standard for supplements that we have reviewed on this podcast. And every supplement that comes after this is going to be compared to these guys, because I am hugely impressed with them. The only thing is, despite all of that, It's still not something that I would use personally because of the limitations. But I do think there are going to be people listening to this who may think that this is worth a try. And I would say 100% they should try it. And I want to hear what their experience is, because I think it's worthy of a try for some people.
Most heat protocols will start 2 weeks out from a race and will end 1 week before a race. If you're going to set up your trainer in the bathroom,
Right.
for example, and really absorb that, or even if you can only even get to the sauna, that's all you can manage because you don't have a setup that will work.
Right.
So why couldn't you run this protocol the same way and start it 2 weeks out, finish it a week out, so you can still have the caffeine effects, you can perhaps reduce, why won't it work?
Because the taurine will go. You have to saturate your
taurine will
tissues. It's
go.
all about the
Okay,
taurine
all
getting
right,
to
okay.
the right levels in your tissues, and it
Mhm.
clears pretty quickly. We did not come across any studies that looked at how fast the taurine dissipates. We didn't come across any studies that talked about how long the effects last, but all the
Mhm.
protocols talk about 8 days ending on your race day. So you really have
Okay.
to be doing this right up to your race day. So I think it's super fascinating. I think it's really interesting. I'm definitely interested in hearing if anybody tries it. I want to hear how it goes. I don't think this is for me because I'm a person who already sweats a lot. I could
Mhm.
not afford to sweat more because I would never be able to keep up with the fluids and salt.
So AI says taurine clears your system in 6.5 hours.
Yeah, so that's the issue,
It's
right?
fast.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so you've
Okay.
really got
Yeah.
to load it, and
Yeah.
then you've got to
Yeah.
load it and have it on board for the time of the race. So there you
Right.
go.
Interesting.
I
Wow.
think this is
Interesting.
great. I think this is great. Props again to True Fuels. I give you my tip of the cap, and they're gonna get my TriDoc podcast Gold Standard Award for supplements. So good going, guys.
I wonder how the athletes who have, or at least who claim to use this, because there's a host of professional athletes on their website that say that they use it. I wonder how they manage all of those different challenges about the caffeine, about
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Alistair.
Alistair doesn't race anymore. Brownlee.
Well, that's true. Yeah, he's on there. Interesting. Yeah, I'd be interesting to hear from one of them too. How do you
Yeah,
manage these in the drawbacks?
yeah.
Perfect. Yeah.
All right. That is I think, a resounding positive for this supplement. The first one I think we've ever really done. But I do want to, again, give them props. And I do want to also say once again, if you have a question for us, we've had quite a few coming in after last week after our last episode when we didn't have an interview. I've had a bunch of people come forward with suggestions for interviews. So thank you for that. We will be following up on all of those. And yeah, if you have a question, please do send it our way. You can email us, tri_doc@icloud.com. Head on over to the TriDoc Podcast Facebook group. If you're not a member, please do search for it. Answer the 3 easy questions will gain you admittance. And I would love to see you join the conversation. Tell us about your use of this product. Tell us about your involvement at US18 Nationals. Send Juliet a kudos and a congratulations on her accomplishments. And give us your questions for future medical mailbags. Until the next episode, Juliet, thanks so much as always for being here. It's always a pleasure. And we'll look forward to chatting again in a couple of weeks' time.
Thank you. Yeah.
My guest on the program is a longtime listener, a friend of mine, somebody who I came to meet by virtue of this program, actually. He has been on the program once before to talk about the 70.3 race that used to take place in his hometown in Phoenix. But he is here now as a guest. I made a call last episode when I mentioned I didn't have an interview lined up, and he said, I'd love to come on and talk about my story. And he's right. He's got a great story. He's got a story that's very relevant to, I think, a lot of listeners. And so Brian Dunn is a very successful age group triathlete, been on a podium many times, steps above me in many races, as we have frequently shared the same age group. And I have had the great pleasure of racing with him at World Championships before, as well as I believe we crossed paths in Kona, I think. And no, we were different years. Okay. But we have shared race courses several times, and it's always a pleasure when that happens. But we chat and text pretty frequently, and so it's a great pleasure to have Brian as a guest on the TriDoc podcast. Brian Dunn, thank you so much for joining me today and being willing to share your story as an age group athlete in their shall we say, 6th decade. We won't go any further than that. Brian, just why don't you give the listeners a little bit of an idea of who you are and how long you've been doing multisport?
I have to say that you and I first met unofficially on the podium at La Quinta.
That's right.
Many years ago. We didn't know each other, but we were both
Yeah.
standing up there, and I have the photograph to prove it.
That's right. Me too.
Yeah, I'm a 57-year-old age grouper out of Scottsdale, Arizona. I've been participating in Ironman distance events since about 2006. That's when I started my career in triathlon, when I was in the 35 to 39-year-old age group. So I was a little bit late coming to the sport. My mother was a multiple Ironman age group winner and a one-time Ironman world champion in Kona for her age group in 1989.
Wow.
So,
Awesome.
yeah. So when it comes to endurance sport, I was born on third. I did not hit a triple. Thank you, Mom.
Yeah.
But I only really started doing it when I moved to Arizona with my wife around 2006. So it's been a big part of my life. And when you were looking for topics to discuss on this particular podcast, the TriDoc podcast, which I really just have found so valuable in so many different ways. So I can't thank you enough for producing the show and keeping it going. One of the issues I think that a lot of us older men have to deal with are cardiac issues, often undiagnosed cardiac issues, which can become very problematic if not addressed. So basically, when I was 49, about to turn 50, I reached out to a cardiologist to have a complete workup done. I wanted to do an echo stress. I wanted them to image my heart. I wanted to make sure that my heart wasn't too enlarged, that my valves were working properly and not regurgitating. All of these sort of things that an endurance athlete who feels that they're very fit can have occurring within them that they're not aware of, that can be very problematic for the proper functioning of the heart. So this was just to give myself a little peace of mind. I went and raced Santa Rosa 70.3. This would have been around 2018, I believe it was, and had a great race. We came back to Arizona. It was probably late July. I got back to training on a Monday or Tuesday, and I went for a run early in the morning, and I noticed that my heart rate was abnormally high, and it shot up very quickly from when I started running. I attributed it to simply lingering fatigue from the race. I figured it's hot. It's Arizona in July and August. I'm probably just responding to the environment a little bit. But it was unusual, and it was worth noting. I coincidentally had my cardiologist appointment scheduled for later that week.
So this was all before you were going to see the cardiologist to get screened. This happened coincidentally.
I made the appointments.
Yeah.
I was all set. And so I show up at the cardiologist's office, and before doing any of the testing, they put me on an EKG. And the doctor walked in and said, "You're an AFib." And I said, "I'm what?" Because I had no idea. When I was just sitting around, I didn't notice anything. I didn't feel the fluttering. I didn't feel anything in my chest. I told him, hey, I did go for a run. I noticed my heart rate was really high, and I thought that was very strange. He said, "Yeah, you are in AFib." So they treated me for the AFib. They put me on the Eliquis. And unfortunately, after about 2 months, I was still in AFib. I just didn't naturally convert. So I wanted to carry on with my life, and I didn't want to be on these medications anymore. So I asked to have a cardioversion done, which is the procedure where they basically knock you out and zap you with the paddles and put you back into normal sinus rhythm. So I went into the hospital, and they did, and I was fine. And then we did the cardiac work, and they imaged my heart, and they did all of the things that I had wanted to do. And the results were, your heart is large, but not enlarged. It wasn't alarmingly large. The thickness of the walls of my heart were not a problem. My valves were working well. There was a slight regurgitation in one of them, but nothing alarming. So they said, "You look good. Just the AFib is, maybe it's a one-off deal. Maybe you'll never have it happen again." Obviously, I believe, and you can correct me, that AFib can be a result of an enlarged ventricle, or that enlarged ventricles can cause AFib, or AFib results.
Yeah. So let me cut in here for a second, Brian, and just explain for people who may have gotten a little bit lost in all of this, because I understand everything you're saying, but I want to break it down for people. So normally our hearts have an electrical system in which the sinus node, which exists within the atrium. So your heart has 4 chambers, 2 atrium, 2 ventricles. There is a left side of your heart, so you have a left atria, a left ventricle, and a right side of your heart, the right atrium, and the right ventricle. And the sinus node normally is where there is this kind of pacemaker for your heart, and it sends off an electrical pulse that causes the atria to contract, and then soon after that, the ventricles will contract. And under normal circumstances, everything is very tightly coordinated and regulated. There can be certain circumstances. There are a host of different reasons for it. The most common reason these days is high blood pressure. Over very long periods of time, you end up with thickening of the left ventricle and eventually enlargement of the atria as well. And as the atrial wall stretches, the sinus node can become distorted and you end up with a loss of normal functioning of the sinus node. And so instead of having the nice normal pacing of that rhythm of that pacemaker, you end up with electrical signals coming very helter-skelter from all over the atria. And so the atria, instead of contracting in a normal way, will do what's called fibrillating. And so they basically just quiver. So the atria don't actually contract in a coordinated fashion. This isn't a huge problem, at least initially, but all of that electrical activity in the atria, which are just quivering, are bombarding what's called the AV node, the atrioventricular node, which is basically the pathway for electrical signals to get to the ventricles. Now, if the AV node is working properly, the AV node is going to block most of that electrical activity, and so the ventricles will only contract a certain amount of times. Some of the electrical activity will get through, but you will have a higher heart rate, which is what Brian sensed. He sensed his heart rate was very high because all of this fibrillation, all of this quivering of the atria, which is basically continuous electrical discharges, a lot of it was getting through. His ventricles were contracting probably 120, 130, whatever it was. And so his ventricles were contracting at a very high rate. He mentioned that when he went in and got an electrocardiogram, we could see an absence of what are called P waves. P waves are the atria contracting on the cardiogram. And we could see also that his heart rate was very irregular, which happens in atrial fibrillation. And so we could make the diagnosis of atrial fibrillation. The issue with atrial fibrillation is when the atria don't have a coordinated contraction, blood tends to pool in the atria and clots can form. And those clots forming in the atria can be absolutely devastating. If they form on the right side of the heart, they can go to the lungs and cause what are called pulmonary emboli, which are potentially fatal. If they form on the left side of the heart, which is much more common, then they go to the left ventricle and then out into the circulation where they can cause all kinds of catastrophic things, most worrisome strokes. So that's why we put people on anticoagulation. Eliquis is an example of a drug that thins the blood or makes you less likely to clot. And as long as you're in atrial fibrillation, you need to be on a medication like that. As a cyclist, you can't be on one of those medications because if you fall while on one of those medications, you will bleed continuously. And if you internally, that obviously is a big problem. So cycling is just not allowed when you're on one of these medications. Brian, of course, doesn't want to be on one. So he wanted to get what's called our cardioversion, which is sometimes not always successful. For him, fortunately, it was. Basically, we sedate the patient, we put electrical paddles on them, we reset the electrical system of the heart. The longer you've been in atrial fibrillation, the less likely it is to work. Brian was very fortunate in that it worked for him on, I don't know how many shocks they had to do, but it worked on him. One shock, nice. So his heart clearly structurally was fine because when a heart is structurally enlarged, it's very hard to get it to go back into sinus. So you clearly were fine. Now, I did an episode way back when, I can't remember when, but we did a 2-part episode with a cardiologist on athlete's heart. And athlete's heart is this thickening of the ventricles, some enlargement of the atria, which can lead to atrial fibrillation. It in itself is not uncommon. It can be easily treated, and guessing probably what you had there. And the screening question that you talked about, I'm not surprised that your screening was all normal because we've talked on this program, should people get screened in the absence of symptoms? Certainly for peace of mind, I would never tell anybody not to. I definitely tell everybody once you're over 40, cholesterol, lipids, those kinds of things you should do. But getting random echocardiograms, stress tests, things like that, the literature really has shown that it's not particularly helpful. But again, they're low cost, they're non-invasive, and if it's going to give you peace of mind, and especially if you have a family history, I don't see a big problem with finding someone who can do it for you. So for you, Brian, it was good that it gave you some peace of mind, but you still had this atrial fibrillation, which is obviously concerning. So please do pick up the story at that point.
Yeah. So I went into normal rhythm. Again, this would have been when I was 50. So about almost 8 years ago now, and had a good diagnosis on everything else. Fine. So I carried on and everything was fine. I didn't have a recurrence of the AFib until in 2024, I had gone to Kona and raced in Hawaii at the Ironman. And that about 2 weeks later, we were home and I was just still recovering. And I was sitting on the couch and I felt a little off. And I was like, oh boy. So I didn't say anything to my wife. I was like, let me go for a run tomorrow morning and I'll know right away. And I literally put on my shoes and I ran maybe 300 feet. And I'm like, yep, I'm in AFib because my heart rate just immediately took off like a racehorse.
I'm
So
just
I
going
was
to say, if you think you're an AFib, folks, don't do that. Drive to the cardiologist or the ER.
I know. Well, I figured it was a relatively low risk, real quick way that I could do it. And I immediately got on the phone and got an appointment to get back in with the cardiologist. And sure enough, I was an AFib. And because of my previous experience, I was like, at this point, can we just go right to the cardio version so I can just get out of this and then we can talk about the future? And so we had me scheduled a week later and went back in.
They didn't put you on any anticoagulation for that week?
Oh, no, we did.
They did.
Yeah.
Okay.
For a week. Yeah. Just for a week, which is fine. I was on the Eliquis. And so they cardioverted me. So in my conversations with the doctor, he said, listen, you have a propensity for this to happen. Dollars to donuts, it probably will happen again at some point. He did not put any limitations on my activity levels at this point, but just made me aware that my condition is probably something that's likely to recur at some point down the road. And at that point, I probably would have to consider the ablation procedure, which you can describe better than I can, where they just zap the part of the heart that's causing the issues as a prophylactic to try and prevent it from coming back. So 2 incidents. So I made peace with it. I was like, listen, this is just the deal. And I never would put competing at an event or even the level of training that I do ahead of my long-term health. And I'm always willing to say, if I'm told by a doctor, hey, that's it, you can't keep doing this, or you need to do less of this, then I am definitely willing to have that conversation, even though it would be a very dramatic change. But again, it's not something that I want to mess around with. And I just want to make sure that I'm making the right decisions for my longevity, for my family, because that's obviously what's most important. So
So the ablation Brian's talking about, sometimes, so they won't do this prophylactically. They'll only do it if you have atrial fibrillation that is difficult to control, or you have someone like Brian who doesn't want to be on a rate controlling medication. For us as athletes, the treatment for atrial fibrillation tends to be controlling the rate. And when you're running, biking, you need your rate to get high. And you can't do that if you're on some of these medications, beta blockers, for example. So an ablation, a cardiac ablation, is one of the things that you can do. And what an electrophysiologist does is they go in and they actually, with a catheter that's inserted through the groin, it's threaded up to the heart, they can actually do some electrical mapping of the atria to see if there is a competing pacemaker area that's causing the fibrillation. There often are small foci that are in the atria that can be found to be the source of the fibrillation. And if you just, like you said, zap them, you just take out those little pacemaker cells, then you return the sinus area, the sinus node, to being the dominant pacemaker, and you can get rid of the problem of ablation. The issue with this is it's not always successful. And even when it is successful, the atrial fibrillation can come back when other areas within the atria then become problematic down the road. But for people in whom it works, it can give lasting symptom relief from atrial fibrillation for quite a long time. So it's definitely an option for you to consider should this recur.
Yeah, what was interesting is that my cardiologist had mentioned, he said, listen, you do an ablation, usually we see that it's good for 7-8 years. And I'm like, that's kind of where my incidents of AFib seem to be occurring on a schedule anyway. So knock on wood, we'll see as I carry forward if it does come back at some point. If it comes back sooner, then an ablation would certainly be something I would consider. If it's another 7 years, then I would probably just go and continue to do the cardio version, assuming that another cardiac workup on my heart doesn't show anything else that I need to be more concerned about.
So I think in many ways, Brian, you're very typical of a lot of athletes in our age groups where you're very active. This is very much a part of your life. It's something you really enjoy, but you're facing the reality that, look, we're getting older. We have these things. But I really like how sanguine you are about this idea that, look, my health comes first, my longevity comes first. I'm not willing. I do this for fun if it's going to be a risk for me. So how do you make that decision making? Like, for example, if you went in, you had told me once that your cholesterol is borderline, but you aren't interested in taking a statin because you are worried about the issue around muscle soreness and loss of muscle strength, which is very real. So how do you make those determinations? Because we also know that statins are very positive in terms of longevity and improved outcomes. So for you personally, how do you handle that?
It's so interesting that you bring up the cholesterol piece, because I was going to actually mention that as part of this call, because I know you and I have had that conversation and you've been very helpful in keeping my head on straight about it, and maybe me not being so pedantic about thinking about, no, I can't do this. This isn't something I do. I actually, a couple of months ago, started to heavily supplement with just an over-the-counter medication called Cholestoff, I think. It's a capsule. It's basically, and also a fiber supplement.
Is it a binding? Is it a cholesterol binder?
No, it's a natural product. There's a fiber. Basically a fiber supplement.
Okay.
I've greatly increased the amount of fiber in my diet through these supplements. And I did do blood work recently, and my total cholesterol number, it dropped from around 300 to 266.
Okay.
And my LDL dropped from 180 down to 130. Suddenly my LDL was at a level where it almost wasn't even excessive. My total number is still high because my HDL is also still pretty high, but it was a huge improvement. My cardiologist was really surprised. So I'm still doing that. I've added an additional just over the counter kind of supplement that, according to ChatGPT, can be effective. So I'm curious to see what it does, and I'll have more blood work done next month and see what the outcome is. So
there's no question. There are non-medication things that can be done, dietary things. Yep. There are, like, I remember reading about oat bran as one of the things that can lower cholesterol. So there are dietary things that can be done, no question. Yeah.
When you post this up, I'll add on the Facebook group, the three that I'm taking, just so people can take a look at it. And if they're having a similar issue, to try it. But so anyway, the cholesterol thing is still a work in progress that I am dealing with. But you're right. In a general sense, I'm being stubborn by not wanting to take the statins. Although, isn't there a new medication that just came out that's not a statin that actually has proven some efficacy?
There may very well be. It's not my area of practice, so I don't follow
I saw
it
something
that closely,
that apparently may not have the same sort of side effects. But anyway.
But I'm interested in how you process these decisions, because you're a very high-performing athlete. It is very important to you. But you're also very attuned to this. Look, we all see what's happening, and we see people dying. We see people succumbing to this kind of stuff. I'm the same way. I'm getting to be older, and I want to keep doing this as long as I can. But at the same time, I want to enjoy my retirement. I want to enjoy my life. So how do you process these decisions?
Yeah, I have a 13-year-old son, so I'm an older dad to a younger son, and he means more to me than anything in the world. And I want to make sure that I'm there for him. I love endurance training and I love racing. If you told me today that I could no longer race, but I could keep training, I'd be okay with that. Mm-hmm. It's a routine of what I do. And so when I consider a world in which my health is being adversely affected by long duration endurance type of training, maybe I'll try high rocks. There can always be something I can do with my time for my physical and mental well-being that doesn't necessarily have to be a thing that is putting me into a level of risk. One thing that I've recently completely given up is riding outdoors. My wife had a bike accident at the end of June, and she broke one of the
non-radius. Yeah.
Right. And then she had fractured some bones in her wrist, and she's still recovering. And she was just out riding, and she hit a piece of metal in the road and went down hard and had to have a plate put in and pins put in. It was a very traumatic event for her. And it was a reminder to me. I love riding my bike outdoors, but not that much.
Yeah.
And I'm willing to maybe say, you know what? I'm just going to ride that trainer. I'm going to do my training on that trainer. When it comes time for a race, I have no problem jumping off the trainer and riding outdoors. That's fine. But I guess in terms of me doing the risk analysis, risk analysis is what I do for a living. I'm an investment advisor, so I'm always managing people's risk. And so when I look at the risk return, and I figure I'm just not going to ride outdoors. It's in the same vein, when I look at my cardiac health, whatever it may be, I need to manage it in the same way. And unnecessary risks just don't make a lot of sense to me in that respect. And I'm sure I can find something else that would provide me the same sort of satisfaction over time and the same health and well-being benefits.
I couldn't agree more. I feel like I've got a lot of other interests in my life as much as I love
pole vaulting.
Sport. Yeah, spectating anyways. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
No, I feel the same way. And I feel like there's just so many other ways, and I will continue to be active and do things. But as long as I can continue to train and compete, I will do so. But if it ever becomes a question, then it's easy. It's an easy decision for me to make at this point because I've been doing it for long enough. What is your advice for others who may, I don't know, they may be feeling that they're not yet done, or they've got more to do, and maybe they're pushing a little bit more and they don't want to hear, or maybe they haven't gone to the doctor because they don't want to get that bad news. They don't want to hear that maybe they need to step back. What's your advice for people like that?
Yeah, I think especially when it comes to our sport in particular, I think you don't need to look much further than these horrible stories we hear of someone in the swim passing away. An undiagnosed cardiac issue, when you do the type of stuff that we do, can be very problematic and dangerous. And I think that to ignore any symptoms, to ignore anything when it comes to that is a mistake. And we need to be very honest with ourselves, and we need to find out what is going on, because you just never know. Again, that's what drove me to see the cardiologist when I was turning 50 in the first place. I just needed to know. As you said, was it necessary? No, I was perfectly fine. It turned out to be necessary in retrospect, but I just wanted that peace of mind. And it's something that unfortunately, you may not know it's happening until it is too late. And that's a scary thought, that you feel like you're doing everything correctly for your health. And then it turns out that the thing you think you're doing correctly for your health is actually causing a damage that you're unaware of that could be very problematic. So I think people should just be very honest with themselves, and especially men as we get older. And if you've been training for a long time, endurance sports has a lot of benefits, but there are some downsides that we all need to be aware of.
Yeah, that's really well said. And I can't think of a better place to finish off than there. Brian Dunn is a very high achieving, very accomplished age group athlete. I've had a great pleasure and great privilege of calling him a friend since we met first at La Quinta, as he reminds me, but through the program as well. And he's been a frequent contributor to that Facebook group. If you're not a member, I hope that you'll head over there. You have one more reason to do so, because he's going to list those healthful supplements that he takes. So head on over to the TriDoc podcast private Facebook group if you're not a member. Answer the 3 easy questions. I'll be glad to gain you admittance, and you can see what Brian takes. You can join the conversation and let us know. Have you ever had any of these kinds of discussions with your physician? Do you have symptoms that you are concerned about? Or have you ever had to face these kinds of problems where you've wondered whether or not this is a sport that you can persist in for a long time? We would love to hear, and we would love to have you be part of that conversation. Brian, thank you so much. Yes.
Can I just add one thing?
Yeah.
Juliet Hockman kicks ass.
Yes, she does.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Her results at National were damn impressive.
Yeah, I know. I'm very privileged to call her a friend as well. And she's
awesome.
She's an impressive individual just across the board. So
yeah,
I am very lucky to have her as part of this program.
I wanted to give her a shout out on the show.
She will be thrilled to hear that. All right, Brian, thank you so much again for joining me today. I really appreciate you so much, and look forward to seeing you at the races sometime soon.
Thank you, Jeff.
Take care.
Hi, I'm Sam Sankoff, and I'm the proud editor of the TriDoc podcast. The TriDoc podcast is produced by Jeff Sankoff, my dad, along with his amazing interns, Cazette Rhodes and Sarah Lopez. You can find the show notes for everything discussed on the show today, as well as archives of previous episodes at www.tridocpodcast.com. Do you have questions about any of the issues discussed on this episode? Or do you have a question for consideration to be answered on a future episode? Send Jeff an email at try_doc@icloud.com. If you are interested in coaching services, you really should please visit tridoccoaching.com or visit lifesportcoaching.com, where you can find a lot of information about Jeff and the services that he provides. You can also follow Jeff on the TriDoc Podcast Facebook page, TriDoc Coaching on Instagram, and the TriDoc Coaching YouTube channel. And don't forget to join the TriDoc Podcast private Facebook group. Search for it and request to join today. If you enjoy this podcast, I hope that you will consider leaving a rating and a review, as well as subscribe to the show wherever you download it. And of course, there's always the option of becoming a supporter of the podcast at patreon.com/TriDocPodcast. The music heard at the beginning and at the end of the show is Radio by Empty Hours and is used with permission. This song and many others like it can be found at www.reverbnation.com, where I hope that you will visit and give small independent bands a chance. The TriDoc Podcast will be back again soon with another medical question and answer and another interview with someone in the world of multisport. Until then, train hard and train healthy.